Story 1. Back in 2023, Congress passed a bill preventing a president from unilaterally withdrawing without the Senate or Congress's approval. I hope there are people with common sense to prevent this from happening. Story 2. Pulling out of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization makes America weaker by eroding our influence. If the United States withdraws from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, countries will seek a new leader. When they find a new leader, their energy and resources will be redirected to strengthen that leader. America has voted to step down from this leadership role. Many Americans disagree with this decision, but it has been made. Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan will all be shifting in some ways. Even if you are not a North Atlantic Treaty Organization country, you will be looking to build ties with the new leader. Story 3. The United States is starting to lose military bases worldwide, which enabled the nation to extend its influence without direct military engagement. Military cutbacks will be necessary due to the reduced need for both personnel and various capabilities. The soft power suggesting that the United States can target almost any location globally at any time will diminish. This will be replaced by isolationism and economic challenges. The military-industrial complex is likely to face significant difficulties in the medium term, struggling to attract foreign buyers. Each military sale requiring government and congressional approval will not be appealing to potential customers. Story 4. You risk losing overseas bases that are important logistical hubs, such as Ramstein. You will lose access to foreign intelligence and the ability to identify vulnerabilities exposed by allies, similar to the small Swedish submarine that defeated the United States Navy. Story 5. We cement our status as a country that can no longer be counted on to support our allies, if we still have allies. We will likely lose visa-free travel to many of our old allies, limit our access to intelligence from those allies, and most importantly, cede Taiwan and all its chips to China, as they will now understand without question that we won't defend Taiwan. Those are just the immediate changes. In the longer term, the dollar will become just another currency, and we won't be able to sell our bonds and treasury bills to other countries, as they won't trust that we will pay them back, nor will we be seen as the ultimate safe haven. I'm only scratching the surface. Story 6. We begin a long slide into isolationism and irrelevancy. If we withdraw from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it is not clear that the dollar will remain the global reserve currency. If it does not, everyone will start demanding repayment on our debt, which weakens our economy. Furthermore, if we lose trading partners, everything will become much more expensive, leading to significant inequality. It is not a good idea. Story 7. The United States has become a pariah that can no longer claim a leadership role in the free world. Its foreign policies, treaties, and allegiances are all suspect and untrustworthy. The full faith and credit of the nation are substantially diminished, if not completely destroyed. The only time the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Article 5 was invoked was to protect and avenge the United States after the September 11th attacks. Essentially, the United States is being ungracious to its allies. Story 8. I don't know, my friend. The only thing I know after this month is that I will never trust the United States again in my life. You did a lot of questionable things throughout the years, but backstabbing the allies who died for you in your wars in the Middle East is far beyond treason and evil. Story 9. I do not understand how hardly anyone is talking about this. What matters isn't our allies or our military bases. It's our currency. The US dollar is only valued because people trust the United States enough to continually buy our treasury bills. Do you know what happens if we are forced to make good on all the debt we have accumulated? We are in serious trouble. Americans have this wide-eyed optimism that somehow we are immune to the same forces that have caused issues in other countries. But there is absolutely nothing that distinguishes us from the likes of Venezuela and Zimbabwe apart from the dollar's influence. Without that, the United States will experience an economic crisis unlike anything the world has ever seen. That is the real issue to worry about, which is why I urge all Americans, regardless of your situation, to consider a way out of the country. Anywhere will be better than the United States if what I am discussing comes to pass. Edit. Something I did not think I had to mention but apparently is not obvious. I am not saying that everyone else in this situation does not matter. The post specified what will happen to the US. So I answered from a US-focused point of view. It is not un-American of me. It is simply answering the question as it was asked. Story 10. You lose the dollar's status as the world reserve currency. You experience hyperinflation because the amount of currency you printed and supplied to the rest of the world suddenly floods back, as no one wants it anymore. Everyone wants to sell the dollar and no one wants to buy it. The prices of everything you import increase significantly because other countries will not accept the dollar, which has become worthless to them. China and BRICS become a credible currency reserve. It may lead to a global conflict. Story 11. Since his first visit to Russia in 1987, the Russians have been flattering Trump and convincing him that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is against United States interests. It is not. It has been a significant factor in world stability, where the United States has been dominant culturally and economically. However, Putin wants to reestablish Russian control over Eastern Europe, and the best way to achieve this is to persuade Trump to undermine NATO. At this point, Trump has been subjected to decades of personal influence, encouraging him to view NATO as detrimental to the United States and will do everything in his power to weaken it. If he succeeds, the United States will be weakened, and Russia, along with China, will become stronger. The Grand Old Party could intervene, but they know that doing so would lead to the Republican Party's collapse and allow the Democrats to take over. They would rather witness the country's decline than let the Democrats win. Story 12. The US dollar ceases to be the global standard, and Trump officially leads us into the worst economic downturn in a century. We would lose our influence, both militarily and economically. We would lose our capacity to deploy our military by sea and air around the world at a moment's notice. We would quickly lose our status as a superpower. It would be historic. Trump would undoubtedly be remembered in the history books. Story 13. The way the United States projects power and protects trade channels is through friendly nations and fostering friendships. Leaving our primary military alliance would damage the rules-based order established after the Second World War. It would also leave our trade channels extremely vulnerable. Our ability to project both soft and hard power would be severely diminished. This situation could potentially usher in a period of neocolonialism in the resulting vacuum. Additionally, we would likely be much less wealthy in the following decades. However, a few self-interested individuals may become very wealthy by facilitating that exit for foreign powers seeking to see the end of United States hegemony. Story 14. If the United States withdraws from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it will lose a significant portion of its foreign influence without gaining anything positive from the trade. The current United States administration talks about NATO as if it were a bad deal, when in reality it is an incredibly beneficial arrangement. In exchange for having troops stationed in Europe and maintaining a modernized military, the United States has been able to engage in global conflicts that further its interests for the past 80 years without being perceived as the villain or facing global sanctions. The United States has also been able to call on European troops for assistance in its military operations and enjoys preferential treatment in the European Union economy, the world's largest single market, over China. Military bases provide influence, and influence leads to better economic deals. This is fundamental to soft power. A withdrawal from international engagement will give rivals the opportunity to benefit at the United States' expense without resorting to military action. Defending democracy in Europe is a key factor that has allowed the United States to maintain the moral high ground as a globally righteous nation. Without that moral high ground, why should the world not impose economic sanctions on the United States when it inevitably enters its next conflict? Why shouldn't we trade more with China instead? While China has its issues, how much longer will the world believe that the United States is the better option? Reliance on the United States for defense enables the country to request special economic favors and deals. Abandoning this position means losing leverage over Europe. If the United States neglects its commitment to Europe, in 20 years, Europe may trade significantly more with China than it does now. The United States government would be left acting surprised and insulted, but would no longer have the influence to prevent this shift. If the United States forces Europe to become self-sufficient in defense, Europe will ultimately achieve this, and the motivation to comply with the United States' geopolitical desires will decline. Additionally, the United States cannot resort to military action in Europe to achieve its goals, as European nations possess nuclear capabilities. This underscores the importance of soft power. It allows influence over global outcomes without the need for conquest. This approach is especially valuable in a world where nuclear deterrence makes traditional conquest an unrealistic option. To give up all that soft power held over the largest single market in the world is akin to attempting to win a global power struggle against China by surrendering your queen before the game even begins, and doing so in exchange for nothing. The notion of a deal is misleading. Story 15. From my perspective in the UK, I believe the idea of America as the leader of the free world is ending. In fact, it arguably has already ended, given the disturbing display in the Oval Office. The United States simply cannot be trusted in any military or financial dealings. Its participation in organizations such as the United Nations, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, World Health Organization, and World Trade Organization, which exist to promote a world based on the rule of law, is subject to being completely undermined every 4 years based on a random selection between democracy and tyranny. The president is using the office as a mechanism for settling personal grudges. What sane country would enter into a treaty or alliance with a nation that permits such absurd personal abuse of its highest office? Story 16. I'm really curious to see how the Trump and Russia propaganda machines try to vilify Europe and NATO, who have never done anything to harm the United States, and make Russia, China, and North Korea, who have actively tried to harm us for decades, seem like our long-lost best friends. Story 17. The entire world would likely move more quickly to the BRIC nations. United States credit may be downgraded, and countries could call in their debts. This would occur because the United States would no longer be trusted by anyone, leading countries to divest from the dollar as the world's reserve currency. A few quick points. The United States provided security assurances to Ukraine under President Bill Clinton, which is why Ukraine denuclearized. This placed Ukraine in a weaker position. When they needed assistance, the response was primarily financial and military support, accompanied by wishes of good luck. Additionally, the only time Article 5 was invoked in NATO was to assist the United States after the September 11th attacks. Therefore, people who claim that the European Union does not support us are unaware of the reality. Story 18. Vladimir Putin exerts himself so intensely that he loses consciousness and is thrown across the room, resulting in injury. Story 19. If the United States withdraws from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it could weaken the alliance's collective defense and influence on global security. This might lead to greater uncertainty in international relations, diminished cooperation on defense, and possibly embolden adversaries. The United States would also lose a key platform for diplomatic and military collaboration with Europe. Story 20. We would lose access to many military bases, limiting our global reach. Defense-wise, we would mostly be okay, though. Geographically speaking, it is difficult to mount a military invasion of the United States. No single nation has the capability to reach here in any meaningful numbers. Story 21. It loses almost all of its military capacity because the primary strength of the United States is its extensive base network around the world and its ability to move assets globally. The United States can launch attacks in the Middle East because it can be supplied by its North Atlantic Treaty Organization partners. It can also conduct strikes in China due to the presence of bases and supply depots in Japan. As the United States turns against its allies and adopts an America First approach, it becomes increasingly limited to operations within its own borders. The greatest irony is that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization essentially serves as America's personal military alliance, with the United States at its helm. It is immensely beneficial to be the leading and dominant member of such a large military alliance. Both China and Russia would readily assume leadership of a similar organization in their own regions. It is akin to an emperor lamenting having to wear a crown and reside in a palace. Story 22. They would likely lose their logistics network in Europe, as it is hard to imagine that European nations would want US bases on their soil if they are not going to help with defense. This betrayal would make Europe less likely to assist the United States, as already seen when a US Navy vessel was refused fuel in Norway. US force projection would be significantly hampered. The United States would become much more vulnerable to attack, as any possible frontline movements from Europe to the US coastline would be a concern, especially with the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap being weaker or outright undefended. This situation would also leave the US more vulnerable to threats from Asia, as Europe would no longer be obligated to help defend American interests. Story 23. The US defense industry export market will collapse. Countries now know that Trump will use any means to threaten them, including withholding spare parts and technical support for any weapons they purchase from the United States. What fool would willingly subject themselves to that? Story 24. We lose the central focus of our international strategy since the end of World War II. We are now significantly weaker and less capable of projecting power across the globe. Story 25. The United States will lose all soft power in Asia and the Middle East. The former is due to a lack of trust in U.S. alliances, while China at least honors its contracts. The latter is because the U.S. mainly projects power through Europe, and logistics without it are just too expensive. U.S. military companies will lose most of their non-U.S. business, as compliance with NATO standards is the most important attribute of military equipment for NATO countries. Story 26. A lot of people who don't actually know what they are talking about will get paid a lot of money to discuss it. Story 27. We may stop receiving information from our former allies about terrorist activities, which could lead to a loss of reciprocity in criminal law enforcement. While we may face economic sanctions, they are not as directly correlated. Story 28. We would stand alone. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization consists of allies we remained with after World War II. The world will essentially become a three-ring circus with the United States, China, and Russia seeking dominance. I wish I were 50 years into the future so I could look back on this time period and see how it played out. Story 29. Truthfully, not much will change in the short term. Russia is bogged down in Ukraine even without support from the United States. Granted, a Russian victory there will be incredibly likely without U.S. help for Ukraine, as the U.S. accounts for almost half of the aid to Ukraine, and Europe is in no position to make up the difference in the short term without deploying troops. However, Russia has paid a terrible price in personnel and, more importantly for its ambitions, in equipment in Ukraine. Russia will not be making any significant moves for a while. In the long term, though, we would see considerable instability. The world has experienced an almost unprecedented period of peace, largely due to U.S. security guarantees. While Europe might be able to manage its own defense against Russian expansion without U.S. involvement, the real impact will be on U.S. allies in the Pacific. Although Pacific alliances are separate from NATO, the United States' lack of commitment to its major alliance could lead countries like China to be more assertive. We would likely see conflict erupt between China and Taiwan, as well as more aggressive moves to claim disputed islands involving the Philippines, Japan, and other non-nuclear states. The loss of Taiwan, in particular, and tensions in Asia would result in global supply shortages, price increases, and economic instability that will affect the entire world. Story 30. If the United States abandons Ukraine and withdraws from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, there is a high chance that Trump is aligning us with a new axis of evil. After Putin takes his spoils of war, he will target Moldova, Belarus, Transnistria, and Georgia. With the backing of Iran and North Korea, he will begin probing NATO countries. What happens next depends on who wins World War III. However, regardless of the outcome, it will not be better than remaining in NATO. Story 31. The only time that Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been used was after September 11, 2001, when all of the NATO allies stepped up and helped the United States fight in Afghanistan. Tens of billions were spent by allies, and many lives were lost to help defend their American ally. If a country were to leave NATO, it would be on its own. Additionally, it would lose NATO bases for force projection, and Europe would have no reason to tolerate the issues from large U.S. tech companies, resulting in those companies losing their second-largest market. Listing just 3 NATO countries, Canada spent $18 billion in Afghanistan, the United Kingdom spent $30 billion, and Germany contributed $19 billion, along with smaller contributions from other NATO partners. The United Kingdom also spent $18 billion in Iraq. Story 32. Russia will begin making threats toward Europe. They will start discussing the liberation of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Moldova, claiming that Russian speakers are being suppressed. Story 33. The United States will become completely irrelevant. If nobody relies on America to police the world and trade agreements are disregarded, there will be little reason to use American dollars. Once everyone stops using the dollar, it will become evident how worthless that currency is. The world will move on, likely splitting between the euro and the currency that BRICS develops. America will no longer be able to purchase large quantities of goods at low prices and will decline into a second-rate power, just as intended. Story 34. Realistically, all the countries in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, including the United States, are weakened militarily. Leaders in Russia and China will take advantage of this situation. The fear of a coordinated defense by NATO will diminish, making war more likely. Story 35. In the long run, the United States goes from being one of the defenders of Europe to becoming one of the countries that Europe defends against. Story 36. You essentially become a country like China or Russia, a superpower without friends. Those friends, despite their faults, went above and beyond to please you and sacrifice lives to support you. Story 37. My guess is that our members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will request the removal of military bases in their countries. This will limit the global reach the United States has. Countries that receive loans from the United States will withdraw financial support. This will diminish the value of the dollar and increase costs. Story 38. Let's discuss realpolitik. The United States is not just a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is, for all intents and purposes, in charge of it. It has more troops, more equipment, and more experience. This enables the United States to place strategically important military bases all over Europe at minimal cost. In short, NATO serves as a tool for advancing U.S. foreign interests. The same can be said for the entire rules-based international order. All of these institutions were established by Americans for their country's own benefit. The individuals responsible for this were not naive. They may have used idealistic language, but these institutions persisted because they served their interests effectively. Leaving NATO would concede influence on some of the most strategic land outside of the continental U.S. It also raises the possibility of a repeat of the scenario from the two world wars, where the United States initially attempted to remain neutral in a European conflict, only to become involved regardless. One of NATO's primary purposes has always been to prevent this from occurring by guaranteeing a swift response from the United States. Story 39. As a rough idea, European countries are shifting to a war economy to support Ukraine and prevent further Russian expansion, which nations like Poland and Finland are particularly concerned about, as well as to diversify from Russian energy. As a result, spending on United States defense contracts is moving to European companies, such as BAE Systems from the United Kingdom and Airbus from the Netherlands. America either continues with its foreign tariffs, making imports more expensive, or seeks new trade partnerships with other nations. If one of those nations is Russia, the cycle continues and worsens. No matter what, this situation does not bode well for Americans, unless Russia gains the ability to purchase United States weaponry. At that point, we could face a global conflict, leading to most European countries evicting any United States military bases and personnel. I do not know if the average American realizes the severity of the situation. The country possesses vast amounts of farmland and natural resources, but the government seems unwilling to confront legitimate threats, such as climate change. Additionally, there is a strong capacity to ramp up production, yet approximately 90% of your potash fertilizer comes from Canada, which your president continues to threaten. In the year 1900, the United States could keep everyone fed and employed by dedicating entire cities and states to that purpose. However, it is now 2025, and much of your manufacturing has been overseas for decades. Companies have relocated, employees have left, and acquiring new skills takes time. It is not feasible to transform Detroit into a microchip production hub overnight, and the government appears reluctant to invest in initiatives that could facilitate such change. Story 40. The United States has a very soft underbelly of low security, easily breached essential infrastructure targets. Homeland security and national intelligence agencies are now in the hands of loyalists, sympathizers, suspected assets, and individuals who are unqualified for their roles. You will be on your own when an attack is deemed timely, or China, or ISIS, or any number of adversaries lying in wait. And remember, any such attack likely won't be military in nature, but cyber. The old adage, united we stand, divided we fall, comes to mind. Even with statements about Europe not relying on the United States for aid if attacked, this might motivate European nations to respond similarly. I believe if the United States were attacked today, Canada would be very reluctant to help. Story 41. U.S. exceptionalism is and always has been a myth. What it had is soft power and the respect of people around the world, deserved or not. However, it has chosen to squander that power with actions in Ukraine, threats to sovereignty, dismantling of the United States Agency for International Development, tariffs, and isolationism. Yes, it is a strong nation, but its slide off the world stage as a respected influencer is accelerating. U.S. soft power has always been more influential than its hard power. It may continue to demand respect, but will not be able to command respect in the foreseeable future. Story 42. The United States leaves NATO and instantly loses a significant amount of diplomatic leverage, no longer considered leaders in the free world, and immediately loses most of its credibility. The United States dollar devalues and is no longer the standard against which currencies are traded. Basically, anyone with common sense knows it is the worst possible thing they could do to themselves. Story 43. Massive nuclear proliferation is occurring. France and the United Kingdom already possess nuclear weapons and are likely to build more. Poland and Germany might follow suit, increasing the likelihood that someone might actually use these weapons. Russia is rebuilding its forces and begins threatening and destabilizing the Baltic states, perhaps attempting to annex one of them while challenging the rest of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to intervene. This could lead to a hot war in the European Union, which would severely impact the global economy. Economically, no country has benefited from the post-World War II international security order more than the United States. Leaving NATO would mean relinquishing the ability to set the rules of the game that favor your interests. This occurs as the global economy slows due to rising distrust, uncertainty, and war. Furthermore, it means the United States would no longer be able to dictate terms to its advantage. Stability and a rules-based order with our trade partners benefit us, while leaving NATO undermines that stability. There is a reason why decades of Republicans have consistently supported NATO and the World Trade Organization. It is undeniably beneficial for business and capital. Story 44. You will receive billions of dollars. I'm telling you, billions of dollars, trillions. You will become billionaires, and you will have the means to spend your vacations in Siberia, hunt bears, and enjoy the benefits of prosperous opportunities in China. Story 45. The United States is going to openly align with Russia and China before Trump leaves office. It will be an axis of powers that do not work together to annex territories for their own benefits but agree to look the other way while they all do it. Other nations of the world will build up military capabilities, including nuclear proliferation for deterrence and aggression. Smaller rogue nations will take the cue that borders can be moved by force and will begin their own campaigns to expand. The dollar will cease to be the default international currency, but nations will not agree on another, destroying international trade. Unless we reverse course, the world is headed for major international conflict and potential nuclear annihilation. Story 46. Well, the United States and Europe are becoming separate military blocs. Economically, we will lose the advantage of specialization because Europe now needs to build parallel military and intelligence structures independent of us. The information technology sector in the United States currently enjoys a monopoly position. This will eventually change as Europe rushes to develop its own systems, which will significantly impact the U.S. economy. You lose the ability to guarantee that Europe will side with you in future conflicts. Europe trades much more with China these days, and it is entirely possible that when you try to rally the world against China or blockade them in a hypothetical war, the remaining North Atlantic Treaty Organization may not assist, or could even undermine your efforts. Diplomatically, you may also find that European nations share intelligence less and are generally less inclined to support your objectives in future international relations. Finally, with the European bloc being somewhat unstable, you may find that NATO continues to weaken until the remaining alliance potentially finds itself at war with an emboldened Russia, effectively destroying the world economy as the agricultural regions of Europe conflict with each other. Story 47. NATO has 32 members, all of whom agree to assist each other if attacked. There are 195 countries in the world. If the United States leaves NATO and another country attacks, we would be on our own. If multiple countries attack the United States, we would also be on our own. Is that what the people want? This situation seems chaotic. Story 48. If the United States withdrew from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, trillions of dollars worth of technology and research would become obsolete. What good is an F-35 when potential adversaries, due to earlier decisions, know all of its capabilities? Even worse, some spare parts may come from the European Union and Canada. If that were to happen, our entire military would need new equipment. Story 49. The United States loses its title as a global superpower and becomes a regional one. Without bases in Europe, the United States cannot project its military power globally, affecting Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. The information network of the United States will shrink, leading to an increase in terrorist attacks against the country and its assets. The United States will also lose its soft and hard power in Asia. If it betrays the North Atlantic Treaty Organization after 80 years of loyalty, it will lose interest in Asia as well. American companies will face significant challenges. They will no longer receive preferential treatment worldwide. Their manipulations and propaganda will result in substantial fines and bans. Social media, in particular, will be impacted as most countries will seek their own versions, similar to what China does. The arms industry will encounter heightened competition from all sides, increased skepticism due to the United States' untrustworthiness, and the reality that countries do not want overpriced American weapons, which, while effective, do not justify their asking price. Story 50. Putin wants the United States out of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization because he intends to wage war in Europe. Trump is no longer pretending. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.